Chapter 1. The grand chandelier hung above the ballroom, its crystals refracting light across the polished marble floor. Waiters in crisp uniforms weaved through clusters of well-dressed guests, balancing trays of champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres. The room buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, the kind of symphony that spoke of wealth, status, and privilege. I stood near the edge of the crowd, fingers wrapped around a sweating glass of whiskey, feeling like an intruder in my own wife's celebration. It was her birthday, an extravagant affair organized by her parents and her arrogant boss, Richard. They had spared no expense, filling the room with people I barely recognized. Business associates, family friends, the occasional celebrity face, all mingling seamlessly in a world that I had somehow always been on the outskirts of, even when I thought I was part of it. Her parents hovered near the center of the room, laughing loudly with guests, practically glowing with pride. They barely acknowledged my presence when I had arrived, a curt nod from her father and a distracted wave from her mother before they were swept back into their circle of influence. I tried to blend into the wallpaper, nodding politely when spoken to, sipping my drink in silence. Then there was Richard, tall, broad-shouldered, with a grin that screamed entitlement. He held court near the bar, surrounded by men in tailored suits who laughed a little too hard at his jokes. His eyes landed on me, and his grin widened, stretching into something sinister. He strolled over, drink in hand, his cologne punching the air before he even got close. Well, if it isn't the party crasher, he smirked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I didn't think you'd show. This really isn't your scene, is it? I forced a smile, biting back the immediate retort that burned on my tongue. It's my wife's birthday. I wouldn't miss it. Richard chuckled, a low, condescending sound. Wife, right? If that's what you want to call it. He raised his glass in a mock toast and walked away, his entourage snickering as they followed. I clenched my jaw, feeling the heat creep up my neck, but I swallowed it down. This was her night, after all. I wouldn't make a scene. Not here. Not now. Across the room, she held court in a shimmering silver dress that caught the light with every move. Her laugh was bright and unrestrained, her eyes sparkling with delight as she clinked glasses with guests. I watched her, my wife, dazzling and distant, a queen among her subjects. But something was off. The way she leaned into Richard's whispered words, the way her hand lingered on his arm a beat too long. My grip tightened around the glass, the ice clinking softly as it shifted. I tried to shake it off, chalk it up to the ambience, the alcohol, the isolation I felt standing there alone. But the feeling lingered, simmering just below the surface. Her parents approached her then, wrapping her in a congratulatory embrace as they toasted loudly. "To our beautiful daughter," her father exclaimed, voice carrying over the music and chatter. "And to her bright future." Their glasses met with a sharp clink, and the crowd around them applauded. I lifted my own glass half-heartedly, though no one noticed. Her father's eyes caught mine for the briefest of moments, a flicker of disdain flashing across his features before he turned back to the crowd. I exhaled slowly, finishing my drink in one long swallow, the burn of whiskey grounding me for just a moment. The waiter passed by, and I traded my empty glass for a fresh one. I wasn't drunk, but I was starting to wish I were. The laughter grew louder, and I could hear Richard's booming voice rise above the crowd. I glanced back toward them, just in time to catch him slinging his arm around her shoulders, leaning in close. She didn't flinch, didn't step away. Instead, she laughed, head thrown back, eyes crinkling at the corners, utterly unbothered. "Hey, loser." Richard's voice cut through the noise, sharper now, more pointed. Heads turned. Conversations paused. He raised his glass in my direction, his grin spreading wide. "Why are you even here?" A hush rippled through the room, eyes flickering from me to him and back again. I swallowed hard, my hand tightening around the glass. "I'm here for my wife." I replied evenly, my voice steady despite the rage bubbling beneath the surface. He laughed, loud and genuine, clapping a hand to his chest as if I'd just told the best joke of the evening. "Your wife?" he repeated, glancing over at her. "Well, isn't that cute?" I looked to her, waiting for the denial, the defense, anything. But she just smirked, swirling her champagne glass with a leisurely grace. "Relax," she said, her voice smooth and loud enough for everyone to hear. "He'll be gone soon, just waiting for the trash to take itself out." Laughter erupted around them, sharp and cruel. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the room spinning slightly as I tried to process what she had just said. Her eyes found mine, and for a moment I saw something there, triumph, maybe, or worse, indifference. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, my chest constricted. But then I felt it, a small hand slipping into mine, squeezing gently. I looked down to find my daughter beside me, her eyes wide and glassy. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough for me to hear. "We need to leave. Something's wrong." I stared at her for a long moment, the sounds of the party muffling around us, fading into nothing. I nodded slowly, squeezing her hand back. "Okay," I whispered. "Let's go." We walked out quietly, unnoticed by the crowd, too busy celebrating their own illusions. But I knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same after that night. Chapter 2. The ride home was silent, punctuated only by the gentle hum of the engine and the rhythmic clicking of the turn signal as I navigated the quiet streets. My daughter sat beside me in the back seat, her small hand still clutching mine, even as she stared out the window with wide, unblinking eyes. I glanced at her every few moments, catching the reflection of passing streetlights flickering across her face. She hadn't said a word since we left the party. I didn't push her. I didn't have the strength to speak either. When we pulled into the driveway, I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind was a whirlpool of fragmented images. The laughter, the sneers, her champagne glass raised as if toasting my demise. My daughter shifted beside me, her hand finally slipping from mine as she reached for the door handle. "Daddy." Her voice was soft, uncertain. "Yes, sweetheart," I replied, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. Why were they so mean? I swallowed hard, feeling the words stick in my throat. How could I possibly explain that kind of cruelty to an 8-year-old? How could I paint her mother, the woman who read her bedtime stories and kissed her goodnight, as someone who could be so callous? I reached over and squeezed her shoulder gently. "Sometimes people forget how to be kind," I said finally, "especially when they care more about themselves than others." Her brow furrowed as she processed my words. I could almost see the thoughts swirling in her young mind, the pieces trying to fit together. She nodded solemnly and climbed out of the car, waiting for me to follow. Inside, the house was dark and silent, untouched by the noise and chaos of the party we had just left. I locked the door behind us, flipping the deadbolt with a sense of finality that felt heavier than it should have. My daughter kicked off her shoes by the door and padded upstairs without another word, her tiny footsteps echoing down the hallway. I watched her go, waiting until I heard her bedroom door click shut before I moved. My feet felt heavy, my body drained, but my mind was racing. Her words from the party played over and over in my head. "Relax, he'll be gone soon, just waiting for the trash to take itself out." I walked into the kitchen, flicking on the light. The harsh brightness flooded the room, making me squint as I poured myself a drink. The whiskey burned on the way down, but it did nothing to dull the ache growing in my chest. I reached for my phone, fingers hesitating over the screen. I had never been one to snoop, always trusting her word, always giving her the benefit of the doubt. But tonight had been different. That smirk, that laugh, she had looked at me like I was already gone. My fingers moved before my mind could stop them. I pulled up her messages, scrolling past the mundane texts, the grocery lists, the reminders to pick up our daughter from school. But buried beneath that veneer of normalcy, there was a string of texts with a name I didn't recognize. "John." I opened the thread, and the world went still. The words blurred in front of me, my eyes scanning the lines of flirtation, secret meetings, inside jokes that I was never a part of. Pictures followed, smiling selfies taken in restaurants I had never been to, candid shots of her at the office, late at night, her hair tousled and eyes alight with joy. My hand shook as I scrolled, the dates matching up perfectly with those nights she had come home late, the time she had claimed she was working overtime, the weekend she said she needed to visit her parents. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a painful reminder of my own blindness. Then I saw it, the group chat. My blood ran cold as I opened it, scanning the list of participants. Her parents, Richard and John. Messages flowed freely, unguarded, each one a dagger in my chest. They knew. They had known all along. Her parents talked about keeping appearances, about supporting her choices. Richard boasted about covering for them during work hours, ensuring I never found out. My hands clenched the phone so tightly I thought it might crack. Rage flared hot and sudden, but I forced it down, pressing it deep into the pit of my stomach. Now wasn't the time. I couldn't afford to lose control. Not yet. I took another drink, the whiskey searing my throat raw. My vision swam, but my mind was clear. I walked to the hallway, peering up the stairs where my daughter slept peacefully, unaware of the world shattering beneath her feet. I wouldn't let this break me. I wouldn't let them win. For her, I would stay strong. For her, I would see this through. I straightened my back, setting the glass down on the counter with deliberate care. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Chapter 3. The days after my discovery moved slowly, each one measured by deliberate steps and careful planning. I had always been methodical. Years of working my way up the ladder in corporate finance had taught me the value of patience and precision. I intended to use every skill I had honed over the years to make sure that when I struck, it would be decisive and absolute. I began with the evidence. Every text, every photo, every email that I had found on her phone was cataloged and stored safely. I created backups, encrypted them, and sent copies to a secure cloud server only I could access. I knew that technology could be fickle, and I wouldn't take any chances. I printed hard copies too, locking them away in a safe deposit box I had secured under my daughter's name, a place no one would think to look. Next came the calls. I reached out to an old friend from college, Mark. He had gone on to become a lawyer, one with a reputation for handling messy divorces with surgical precision. He didn't ask many questions when I called, just listened as I laid out the basics. "You're absolutely sure?" he asked after I finished recounting the events of that night and the evidence I had gathered. "More than sure. I want to move forward. I want it airtight," I replied, my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end. "All right, I'll get the papers ready, and I'll reach out to someone I know. You're going to need a private investigator. Discreet, professional. That's exactly what I need." We exchanged a few more details, and then I hung up, feeling the first flicker of control returning to my hands. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was enough to keep me going. The next call was to a financial advisor. I had handled our finances for years, but I wanted another set of eyes, a professional's perspective. I wanted to know exactly where every dollar was, where it had gone, and how much of it had been funneled into her little escapades. I was thorough. I want a map of every bank statement, every credit card purchase, every suspicious withdrawal. My advisor was more than willing to help. He promised a full report by the end of the week. I thanked him and ended the call, my hands steady and my heart beating with a measured rhythm. Piece by piece, I was building something unbreakable. At home, I played my part perfectly. I smiled when she walked through the door, asked her about her day, pretended to care about the dull recounting of her office life. Richard's name came up a few times, casually slipped into conversation like it was the most natural thing in the world. I nodded along, keeping my face carefully neutral as she chattered on about meetings and deadlines. I imagined every word as a thread, weaving her own noose. I observed everything, her phone habits, her messages, the nights she came home late smelling faintly of aftershave that wasn't mine. I didn't confront her. I couldn't. Not yet. It would be like striking a match before the dynamite was ready. My daughter watched me with curious eyes. She was too smart for her age, always had been. She asked questions sometimes, little ones that I deflected with practiced ease. But one evening, as we sat at the dinner table, just the two of us, she put her fork down and looked at me with those wide, knowing eyes. "Dad," she began, her voice soft, hesitant. "Are you okay?" I looked up from my plate, forcing a smile. Better than ever, sweetheart. She stared at me for a long moment, her brow furrowing. You don't seem like it. I reached across the table and took her small hand in mine. Sometimes grown-ups have to do hard things. But I'm okay. I promise. She nodded, accepting my answer even if she didn't fully understand it. I squeezed her hand gently before letting go, and she returned to her food with the innocence of a child who trusted her father completely. I held on to that trust. It fueled me, hardened my resolve. I would not let her down. I would not let either of us be taken for fools. By the end of the week, Mark called me back. Everything's set, he said simply. I've spoken with the investigator. He'll start trailing her Monday. Get a few weeks, and we'll have everything we need. Good, I replied, my grip on the phone tightening. And the financials? I've looked over everything. Some discrepancies, nothing blatant, but enough to raise suspicion. Your advisor sent me the reports. We'll need more time to dig deeper, but there's definitely something there. Keep going, I told him. I want it all. He laughed quietly on the other end. You're not playing around, are you? I didn't smile. Not even a little. We ended the call, and I leaned back in my chair, the tension in my shoulders easing just a fraction. I wasn't done, not yet, but I was close. So damn close. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every glance, every lie that had passed between us. It was methodical, calculated. I was preparing for something final, something resolute, and I would not falter. Not for her. Not for any of them. Chapter 4. The day of the corporate event dawned crisp and clear, sunlight spilling through the curtains of my office as I adjusted the cuffs of my shirt. Everything had been set into motion, each piece placed with deliberate care, each step taken with methodical precision. I had made sure that every shred of evidence was unassailable: text messages, photographs, financial records, and sworn statements from key witnesses. I had even looped in a few local media contacts who had an eye for corporate scandals. After all, her boss, Richard, was as complicit as she was. I arrived at the venue early, blending seamlessly into the gathering crowd of executives, shareholders, and department heads. The event was grand, crystal chandeliers hanging from vaulted ceilings, rows of white-clothed tables set with sparkling glassware. Richard had spared no expense, his arrogance shining through in every detail. He walked around with that signature smirk, shaking hands and patting backs, blissfully unaware of the storm about to crash through his perfect little world. I watched from a corner, sipping my drink and observing the room with practiced patience. My wife arrived with her parents, all of them dressed to the nines. Her father shook hands with Richard, laughing like old friends, while her mother scanned the room with that self-satisfied smile I had come to despise. My wife, draped in a crimson dress that clung to her figure, glanced around nervously. For a moment, our eyes met across the room, and she flinched, quickly looking away. Good. Let her be nervous. I set my drink down and straightened my jacket, walking calmly to the stage where the presentation was about to begin. Richard took the microphone, grinning widely as he addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming. Today is a celebration of growth, of partnership, and of the future we are building together. The audience applauded politely. I waited, watching his every movement, the way he relished the attention. He had no idea. None of them did. When the initial pleasantries were over, Richard gestured for the first presentation slide to appear on the projector behind him. The screen flickered to life, but instead of charts and figures, it showed a text message thread, one filled with familiar names. My wife's name, his name, her parents. There was a collective gasp as the messages scrolled automatically, revealing flirtatious banter, secret rendezvous, and thinly veiled contempt for me. I stepped forward, my shoes clicking against the polished floor as I approached the stage. Richard stared, frozen, his hand still gripping the microphone as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. What is this?" he stammered, eyes darting around the room as whispers erupted from every corner. "Oh, just a little transparency, Richard," I replied smoothly, my voice carrying through the speakers. "I thought your company prided itself on integrity." Isn't that the motto plastered all over your brochures? Her parents stood from their seats, her mother pale and shaking, her father's face contorted in disbelief. My wife, still seated, covered her mouth with her hand, eyes wide and wet with panic. I ignored them, turning back to Richard. You didn't think you could just get away with it, did you? I asked, my voice low but steady. Affairs in company offices, falsified expense reports to cover up your little excursions? Not to mention enabling my wife to humiliate me while you played the hero. How's that going for you? He stumbled back a step, dropping the microphone with a loud thud that reverberated through the room. A security guard approached, but I held up my hand. Not yet. There's more. I nodded to the technician, who clicked the next slide. Financial records appeared, payments authorized by Richard, funneled through side accounts to pay for hotel rooms, lavish dinners, even vacations I was told were business trips. The audience gasped louder, phones snapping pictures, whispers turning to full-blown conversations. "You," Richard sputtered, his face flushed red with fury. "You can't." "Oh, but I did." I cut him off, stepping closer. "And just so we're clear, I've got copies of all this with my lawyer. He's very thorough. I'm sure the board of directors will be thrilled to see how you've been spending company money." Her parents tried to move toward the exit, but two men in suits blocked their path. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," I called out, my voice echoing through the room. "We're just getting started." I turned back to my wife, who still hadn't moved from her seat. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide and pleading. "Please," she whispered, barely audible. "Please," I repeated, tilting my head as if considering it. I stepped closer, bending down, so only she could hear. "You wanted the trash to take itself out?" I whispered, my voice icy. "Consider it done." Her eyes filled with fresh tears, and she reached for my hand, but I pulled away, straightening my jacket and turning back to the crowd. Richard was now being escorted out, his face pale, his hands trembling. Her parents were ushered out as well, their heads hung low, the weight of public disgrace pressing down on them. I stepped off the stage, the crowd parting from me as I walked, my head high, my hands steady. The weight I had carried for so long finally began to lift, replaced with something colder, sharper, but undeniably lighter. I left the venue without looking back, the sound of whispers and hurried conversations trailing behind me. The detonator had been pressed. Now, all that remained was watching the fallout. Chapter 5. The fallout was swift and unforgiving. News of the scandal spread like wildfire through social circles and corporate boardrooms alike. I had expected whispers, the usual exchange of gossip over coffee and cocktails, but what came was a tidal wave of judgment that crashed upon my wife and her co-conspirators with relentless force. Her boss, Richard, was the first to fall. Within days of the event, the board held an emergency meeting. His face was plastered across news outlets, headlines screaming of misappropriated funds, ethical violations, and scandalous affairs. He was promptly fired, escorted from the building by security as photographers snapped pictures of his disgraced exit. His reputation, once solid and untouchable, crumbled to dust. He had been blacklisted, his name whispered in contempt in every networking event and corporate gathering. No one wanted to touch him. He was toxic. My wife wasn't spared either. Her involvement became public knowledge. Her smug grin at that birthday party, now a cruel reminder of her arrogance. Friends she had once lorded over with her self-righteousness now distanced themselves, their texts and calls vanishing into silence. Her social media accounts were flooded with disdainful comments, accusations, and ridicule. The perfect life she had tried to build, propped up by lies and deceit, fell apart brick by brick. At first, she tried to call me, frantic, desperate voicemails left on my phone at odd hours of the night. Her voice cracked with desperation, the usual arrogance replaced by panic. "Please, we need to talk. I can explain. I didn't mean for any of this," she would sob, the words blurring together in gasps and stammers. I never responded. Not once. I had nothing left to say to her. Her parents weren't spared from the wreckage either. For years, they had acted as though their wealth and status put them above reproach. But when it was revealed that they had facilitated the affair, using their connections, their influence to smooth over the logistics, to hide her indiscretions, it all came crashing down. Business partners withdrew, charity events suddenly lost their invitations, and their social circle shrunk almost overnight. Their empire, once solid and unyielding, began to splinter. I heard through mutual acquaintances that her father had nearly bankrupted himself trying to cover legal fees and salvage what was left of his company's reputation. Her mother had retreated from public view altogether, too humiliated to face the whispers and sidelong glances that followed her everywhere. They had laughed at me once, called me a loser. Now, they were the ones clawing desperately to hold on to what little respect they had left. At home, things were different, calmer. My daughter and I settled into a routine, one that no longer revolved around walking on eggshells or second-guessing the truth. I enrolled her in a new school, one closer to the house I'd moved us into, a modest but comfortable place that was ours alone. I wanted her to have stability, peace, to feel safe. She adjusted quickly, proving once again just how resilient she truly was. Her teachers sent notes home praising her kindness and sharp mind, and I couldn't have been prouder. At night, we would sit at the dining table and do homework together, her pencil scratching across the paper as I prepared dinner. It was simple, honest, and real. And for the first time in what felt like years, I felt like I could breathe. One evening, as we sat eating dinner, she looked up at me with her big, thoughtful eyes. "Dad," she asked softly. "Yes, sweetheart," I responded, looking up from my plate. Are you happy now?" Her voice was tentative, almost afraid of the answer. I paused, considering her question. For a long time, happiness had felt like something out of reach, something reserved for someone else. But now, sitting across from her in our small but warm dining room, I found that my answer came easily. "Yeah," I replied, my voice steady. "I think I am." Her face broke into a smile, and she nodded, content with my response. It was a simple exchange, but it felt monumental. It marked a shift, proof that we were healing, that life could go on, stronger than before. The phone still rang sometimes, numbers I didn't recognize, voicemails left that I never bothered to listen to. I knew she was out there somewhere, picking up the pieces of the life she had shattered. But that was her burden to carry, not mine. I had my own life to live, one that was finally mine and mine alone, and I intended to live it well. In the quiet moments of the night, as my daughter slept soundly in her room and the house settled into stillness, I found peace. Real, unshakable peace. Something I hadn't felt in years, and I knew I would never trade it for anything or anyone ever again. Chapter 6. Months passed, and with each one, I found myself growing stronger. The shadows of betrayal that once loomed so heavily over me began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose and renewal. I had always been methodical, disciplined, even when my life was unraveling. I never lost sight of what mattered, my daughter and my dignity. In the wake of the chaos, I threw myself into work, transforming my modest business into something far greater. What started as a small consulting firm quickly expanded, bolstered by the connections I had made during the fallout. Richard's downfall left a power vacuum in the industry, and I was more than willing to step in. His former clients, many of whom despised his arrogance, were eager to work with someone they could trust. I signed contracts, brokered deals, and built partnerships that catapulted my company's growth beyond anything I had imagined. But it wasn't just business that grew, it was my spirit. I began reconnecting with friends I had lost touch with, joining community events, and even volunteering at my daughter's school. For the first time in years, I felt part of something bigger than myself, a network of genuine people who valued honesty and integrity. It was at one of these community events, a charity auction for the local children's hospital, that I met her. Stella. She was standing near the entrance, clipboard in hand, directing volunteers with an effortless grace. Her laugh was light, genuine, and when she spoke, people listened. I watched her for a moment, caught off guard by the ease with which she seemed to command the room without an ounce of arrogance or pretense. I didn't approach her right away. Instead, I lingered on the edge of the event, chatting with familiar faces, bidding on a few items, and keeping an eye on my daughter, who had taken to exploring the event with wide-eyed curiosity. But as the night wore on, our paths inevitably crossed. "You're bidding on the old record player?" she asked, nodding toward the antique setup displayed on one of the tables. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity, a playful grin touching her lips. I chuckled. "I'm more interested in fixing it than actually listening to it," I replied. "I like a good project." Stella smiled, extending her hand. "Stella, I'm the event coordinator." I took her hand, shaking it firmly. "Nice to meet you. I'm Carter." Her grip was confident, her smile genuine. We spoke for only a few minutes, but it was enough to feel a connection, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't forced, it wasn't performative. It was real. As the event wrapped up, Stella found me again. "I'm glad you came tonight," she said warmly. "We need more good people supporting causes like this." "Glad to be here," I replied. "And if you ever need help fixing that old record player, I'm just a call away." Her laugh was light, melodic. "I'll keep that in mind." That night, as I tucked my daughter into bed and reflected on the evening, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long while, the world felt open, like maybe, just maybe, there was something worth exploring beyond the rubble of what had been destroyed. Meanwhile, the echoes of my ex-wife's decisions lingered like ghosts. I heard through the grapevine that she was struggling, that her attempts to rebuild her life had fallen flat. Her lover had left her once the dust settled, his own career in tatters. Her parents had retreated into their gated mansion, their finances strained by the legal battles and the crumbling of their reputation. I felt nothing for them. No pity, no empathy, just distance. Like watching the remnants of a storm fade into the horizon. But I had moved on. My daughter and I were building something new, something real. And perhaps, if life was willing, there was room for more. But for now, I would focus on what mattered. Living well, loving fully, and never again letting deceit darken my doorstep. Chapter 7. The revelation came on a quiet Sunday afternoon, unbidden and unexpected. I had been sorting through some old documents, clearing out remnants of a life I no longer wanted to remember when the call came through. It was Michael, the private investigator I had hired months ago. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, not since everything had settled into its rightful place. "Carter, I found something," he said, his voice low and steady. There was a gravity to his tone that sent a chill through me. I set the papers aside, my fingers tightening around the phone. "What is it?" "It's about your ex-wife's family, specifically her father. I think you're going to want to see this." An hour later, I was seated across from him in his office, a manila folder spread out between us. Michael's expression was unreadable as he pushed the documents toward me. "I dug a little deeper after everything went down," he explained. "Turns out, their involvement wasn't just covering up her affair. There's more, much more." I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the neatly organized pages. Financial statements, email threads, signed contracts, all linking her father to fraudulent dealings, money laundering, and something far darker. It wasn't just about enabling his daughter's affair. It was about protecting his own empire. An empire built on lies, manipulation, and, as I now understood, illegal activities. "They've been funneling money through shell companies," Michael continued. "Your ex-wife's affair was just the tip of the iceberg. Her father's been covering up his own messes for years. And the kicker? They were using your name on some of the financial documents, trying to pin it on you in case things went south." My stomach clenched. "They tried to frame me?" Michael nodded. "If this ever blew up, and it was bound to, they had the paperwork in place to make it look like you were complicit." Rage simmered beneath my skin, my fists clenching at my sides. All this time, they hadn't just been betraying me emotionally, they had been setting me up to take the fall for their crimes. "What do we do with this?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fury coursing through me. Michael leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. "That's up to you, but I'd say it's time for one last reckoning." The next few days were a blur of preparation. I met with my lawyer, laying out the evidence, making sure every piece was in place. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. About making sure they paid for every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to destroy me while preserving their own twisted dynasty. When the confrontation finally came, it wasn't in some dramatic boardroom or a courtroom. It was in the same mansion where I had once been laughed at and belittled. Her parents stood across from me in their grand living room, the same room where they had toasted to my supposed failure. Now, their faces were pale, eyes wide with fear as I laid the documents on the table between us. "What is this?" her father demanded, his voice shaking slightly. "It's your legacy," I replied coldly. "Fraud, money laundering, attempted framing, all of it. I have enough here to ruin you, to make sure you never set foot in another boardroom for the rest of your miserable life." Her mother's face blanched. This is a mistake. "We didn't save it," I snapped. "You used me, lied to me, tried to destroy my life to protect your own. Now, you get to face the consequences." I turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. "By the way," I said, glancing over my shoulder, "I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. Not the philanthropists, not the power couple. Just a pair of liars and thieves." I walked out that door and didn't look back. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly free. I had faced the last of my demons, torn away the last remnants of their control. And as I stepped into the sunlight, I knew I was finally done with them. Completely and utterly free to rebuild, stronger than before.